While most people in the community opt for an A5 size notebook, what can be really exciting is a tiny notebook, whether that be an A6 size, pocket size, or passport size. Smaller notebooks are great because they are super portable, but it can be a little tricky moving from something like an A5 size to one that is considerably smaller. So today we're going to look at 50 different layout ideas that you can set up in your tiny notebook. So let's move in a little bit closer so we can have a better look at them. This little guy here is the pocket-sized notebook from Archer & Olive, and in terms of the dock grid space, we have 8 centimeters across and 13 centimeters down. In the front cover here I have written my name. That is not one of our ideas, but the first one that we have, flipping on over, is a year at a glance. Now it is a little bit harder to get a full year on one page. You'd have to write quite small in order to do that, so I have instead just put 6 months. You could do this on a full spread, so 2 pages together to get the full calendar year in, but as you can see, it does comfortably fit 6 months in there. This year at a glance can just be used as a reference for the calendar, or you could use it for some kind of habit tracking, or tracking your holidays and sick days from work, or whatever else. Flipping over though, and we have a possible layout for a future log. Again, I've opted for 6 months here, rather than a full 12 months, just so that there's enough writing space for each of the months individually. You could of course take each of these pages and put a line down the middle to separate it into 12 equal segments, but this just offers enough space to write maybe 6 or possibly 7 different entries for each of the months. It could be used in the way that the future log typically is, by writing out events that are coming up, or it could be some kind of a memories log. There are other options for future logs though, and you could go with a Calendex style if you wanted to. We do have a separate video on how the Calendex works, but in this case we have a row for each of the months, these 6 months of the year, and then each column represents a day. You can see that the end here is jagged because February only has 29 days next year, whereas January, March, and May all have 31. While the Calendex is typically used to track future events by writing them within the daily logs of your journal and then referencing them on this layout here, you could also use this in other ways, for instance maybe tracking projects that you're working on, so doing different colored boxes for different types of project work, or you could use this as some kind of a reading log, say if you only ever read up to 4 books at once. Personally, I try to stick to just 2, but if you quite like reading and quite like reading multiple things at once, you could use a layout like this to track when you were reading particular books. Flipping over, and the next idea we have is a 24 in 2024, or 24 goals to do in the year of 2024. We have 2 different layouts for this, so either you can just write a list of what those goals are, and then tick them off as you complete them, or you could put this in a grid layout, so 4 boxes by 6 boxes, and then fill them with a little description of the goal, or maybe some doodles or a picture. Oftentimes I like to use a combination of both to make it a little bit decorative, and then you just color in the box once that thing has been done. Essentially the same information would be captured on both though, we just have a list view and then a more pictorial or grid-based view. The next layout idea we have is that of a weekly timetable. Now you're probably not going to be able to fit a full 24 hours down the side, at least if you want any spacing larger than 1 box per hour. So here I've used 1 centimeter or 2 grid boxes per hour. So we've got 7 AM at the top, then a centimeter down it's 8, centimeter down it's 9, so on and so forth. Typically when I do a timetable layout, I don't often write down the hours that I'd typically be sleeping anyway, and I don't really schedule my time after 8 PM. Taking this though, we have a centimeter column for each of the days of the week, and you can just block in when you're doing certain things. So maybe all of this 7 to 8 block is like a morning routine or something. Maybe 8 to 8:30 is getting ready for the day in terms of organization. Really depends on how you're filling your time. You could also pair this with some kind of a color code so that you don't have to write things into the little boxes, just so then you can see at a glance that maybe all of the blue boxes are for work and all of the purple ones are for social tasks or whatever else. The idea we have on the right though is more of a weekly schedule. So thinking about the 7 days of the week in this section here, and what kind of tasks you want to do on each of those days as related to different categories of life. So I put work for one column and home for the other, and then this one down the bottom is for tasks that don't have a specific day that they're assigned to. They're still things that you want to do on a weekly basis, but they don't necessarily have to happen on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday. Flipping over, and our next idea is that of a monthly tasks list. So the idea for this layout is that you'd list out all of the tasks that you want to do once per month, and then each of these columns on the side represent those different months. So J for January, F for February, so on and so forth. As you complete them within each of those months, you can then just tick off underneath the relevant column for the relevant task. It's effectively for habits that you want to do once per month. You may also have things that you want to do once per week, so we have a weekly tasks list as well, where each of the dots on here represents a week, and they come under some header that describes the thing you're trying to do on a weekly basis. As you do them though, you can then just tick them off. So week 1, we did the meal plan, week 1, we did taking out the bins, but maybe we didn't end up spending time in nature, so we can cross that off, maybe just put a dot, whatever symbol you want to use to indicate that things have been done. You can see that in terms of the dots here, we only have 26 for each of the different tasks. So this would be a half-year tracker rather than a full-year tracker. If you wanted to make it a full year though, you just need to include another 2 rows of those dots. So 13 per row, 26 for a half year, or 52 for a full year. Thinking about another weekly option, you can of course set up a weekly tracker in here. Again, I've gone with 26 weeks rather than the full 52, so good for a half year. And this one is based on some kind of a scale. I've done it out of 7, so maybe that could be the number of days in that week that you did a particular thing. Maybe the number of days that you hit your water intake goal, or exercise goal, or did journaling, whatever else. I put in a space to specify what the scale actually represents. So for our example, it'd be 1 day completed, 2 days completed, etc. And then for the additional space that I had left over, I just put in a start and end date for whatever I was tracking, and then maybe a little space for any findings that I had, or takeaway notes. For instance, maybe there were certain happenings that led to these high days versus the low ones. Another idea for your cute little notebook is turning it into a when did I last space. So having a layout dedicated to those things that don't happen so often, but you want to be able to remember when you last got around to them. The examples we have here are changed oil in the car, replaced batteries in the alarms, changed the water filter, and ordered new candles. Because I can certainly tell you it has been quite a while since I ordered any candles, given the fact that I don't buy candles. Anywho. Another yearly idea is that of a year in pixels. So this is where one dot grid box represents each day of the year, and you fill those boxes in based on some kind of happening. A lot of the time people use them for a mood tracker, so they give different moods different colors and color in the boxes based on the predominant mood for that day. I've also seen them done for weather trackers, so either the highest or lowest temperature for the day, or sometimes both, where they fill in half the box one color, half the box another. But you can also use them for some kind of challenge or habit that you're trying to build. For instance, filling in the box depending on how much money you spent in the day, whether you did or didn't drink enough water, completely up to you. This one is based on the idea of going left to right, top to bottom. So this would be January 1st, January 2nd. Then we have the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, follow through the rest of the row before starting on the next row. That makes this box here January 31st. And then the F represents February 1st. I did just represent the first of the month with the initial for the month to make it a little bit easier, but you could of course go in and number each of the boxes if you wanted to. A layout idea that I would probably place closer to the start of the journal if I was going to use it is that of a grid spacing guide, and it's usually recommended that if you're going to put it at the very start of the notebook, you put it on the left-hand page so it's easier to look at and flip back to, whereas if you're going to put it at the back of your notebook, putting it on the right-hand side is a good idea. This one just represents how to divide an individual page up, whether it's halves with the dark line here, or into thirds using the grey lines instead. Because it is a smaller notebook, I probably wouldn't go smaller than thirds, unless I was working on something specific like the days of the week, where I might want to divide it with horizontal lines into 7, or something similar. We had a weekly tracker, so we of course needed some monthly trackers as well. We have 2 different options here. This one is based on a bar graph, so some kind of scale that you could put at the top and then show how much something happened in each of the different months. Could be total cumulative steps, or number of books read, number of pages read, electricity bill, really depends on what you want to track. Whereas this one over here is mainly based on the idea of something happening or not happening. Each of the different icons represents something that you're trying to have happen on a monthly basis. And then as the key shows, for any of the ones that don't get done, you just go over the top with a black dot. So maybe in January, all of them happened except for the triangle. We put a black dot over the triangle. And then in February, the triangle happened, but maybe the question mark item didn't, and the little house item didn't, so on and so forth. Another way to track your monthly tasks is just by writing them out with little checkboxes, so that's the option that we have here. This one I have actually divided, so we have the full 12 months, so splitting the page in half and then into sixths, so that we can have 4 individual items per month. And then as they happen, you just tick them off or cross them off if they don't happen. Something that I very much wanted to put in this little book, because I was trying to think about ways you might actually use a pocket-sized notebook while I was going through, is putting in a little meal planning section. So maybe this could be like a little book of recipes with a meal plan in it, and maybe some nutritional notes or whatever else, thinking kind of on the food aspect of physical health. But you might be able to tell here that this page is a little bit reflective, and that's because I've stuck some contact paper over the top of it. The reason for this is that it makes the page reusable. So rather than just writing out the plan for 1 week and then having to set up another one the next week, because of that contact paper, you can write over the top of it, either with a dry erase marker or a permanent marker that you then have to put a little bit more force into removing. So for instance, let's just say for dinner on Thursday, we're having chicken. You might want to be a little bit more descriptive than just chicken. So this is a permanent marker that would typically sink through the page and bleed through to the other side. But as you can see, because it is on that contact paper, it hasn't done this. Then with some brute force, we can just get rid of that with a tissue. Now you can see here that you do have to be careful. I've only put the contact paper in the grid itself rather than all the way to the edge of the page, which meant that as I erased it, I've buffed some of the color over here, but you can get around this just by putting the contact paper over the full page rather than just the grid. On to some monthly log ideas. I of course wanted to include one that had 6 weeks, because I know that the grid spacing often changes a little bit when we have those particular months that start at just the right time for the calendar to go across 6 weeks instead of the regular 5. Because the spacing on this calendar is fairly small, you probably don't want to write too many things in it, but it could be a good opportunity to use it as some kind of a tracker for different happenings that you're trying to maintain. So setting up a little key where each of the different symbols represents a different thing that you're either doing or trying to make happen, and then using those symbols on the calendar to indicate any repeated events. So maybe the little heart here is representative of some kind of social commitment that you have on a regular basis. So I could do that for Bujo Wednesday and just go put a little heart on each of the Wednesdays to say that that is happening. That way I don't have to write out Bujo Wednesday 4 times. There is a little bit of extra space left over, so you could use that for some notes, or you could of course put the key into those spaces if you wanted a little bit more horizontal writing space. That was for a 6-week monthly calendar, but if you've got a 5-week, you can then change this a little bit so that you have a bit more writing space. That's vertically rather than horizontally. And I've just left this space on the side for notes, but you can put whatever you want there. Maybe some decoration, maybe a small tracker of some description, whatever else. For this one, each of the boxes are 2 centimeters across, or 4 dot grid boxes, and 5 dot grid boxes down, or 2.5 centimeters. Whereas on our last option, we had a 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter box for each of those grid boxes. While my personal preference is for a calendar grid when it comes to my monthlies, you can also do this in different styles as well. So for this monthly log, we have a line for each of the days, spread across 2 pages, so 1 through 15 and 16 through 30. This gives us some sections at the top, so I filled this in with a to-do list, and then also just a small grid calendar. Maybe just so that you can see which days of the week these fall on. Or you could use it as some kind of a habit tracker, where you're tracking one habit in particular for each of the days of the month, and you just color in the box to say that that habit got done. Moving into weekly logs though, one of the simplest weekly logs is just taking each of the pages of a spread and dividing them into 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and the same on this side too. That gives you the 7 boxes for the days of the week, and an extra box for something else. I've just labeled this one as notes. You do of course have a little bit more vertical space if you don't include a header, but the header could just be the date range for the week. I find that this spacing is actually quite comfortable to write things in, and it's good for if you don't have a lot of things that you want to record on each of the days, while still having a good amount of horizontal space to write stuff in. Another style of weekly log that we have also relies on splitting the pages in half, but for this one we have those 8 boxes on the left hand side, and then the right hand side is just for a running task list. This gives you a little bit less vertical space to write for each of those days, but the addition of the running task list is something that I often prefer. There are a lot of different options for making weekly logs in any size of notebook, and an A6 is no exception. So here's another style you can use. Again, we've split it in half, but this time we have 6 boxes on the left. We've got a similar idea here on the right, but some of the boxes have been combined to make some larger sections. These ones I've put in as notes and to-dos, but you could of course include maybe a mini tracker in here, or even several if you wanted to. Make it more of a dashboard style. And of course, all of these ideas are changeable in that you can use your own colors and own decoration and whatnot. I've just gone super simple in this one to kind of make it so that the layout itself is what's standing out. Two more styles of weekly log that we have are one-page weeklies. So on this one, we have 2 lines per day of the week and a to-do list section, whereas this one is in the Alistair method. So we have a column for each of the days of the week, and then a space to just write down the tasks. And then for any of the days that you want to do them on, you just put a dot underneath the initial for that day. So this would be a task for Monday, whereas the next one maybe is a task you're scheduling for Thursday, so we put a dot underneath there. And maybe then you have a couple more tasks for Wednesday or Tuesday, meaning you can schedule those tasks for later in the week before you actually get to that day. Whether weekly logs are going to be useful in your mini journal and what style you want to opt for really depends on what you're using your mini journal for, but hopefully those options are helpful. Along with weekly logs, we of course have the option of daily logs. The first option we have here would be a kind of build as you go daily. So rather than having a full page for a daily log, like we have on the right here, this one you would just fill in up until the end of the day and then rule off a line and start the next day. We've got a couple of columns here, so HWP for maybe home tasks, work tasks, and personal tasks. So effectively doing an Alistair method, but based on place or theme rather than day of the week. That way, when you're at home, you can look down the list and find any of the tasks related to being at home. When you're at work, you can look down and find only the ones in that W column. Of course, homework and personal are just ideas. You can theme them however you want, but I like to theme them by context or by place. For our next daily log idea, this one is based on setting yourself a specific priority for the day that you can cross off once you've completed it. It also has a space to put in a daily highlight or something special or interesting about that day, and a place to note down something you might be grateful for. And then underneath this, just a regular to-do list. This style of daily log is a little bit more structured. You'd probably go in ahead of time and write out the headers, priority, highlight, etc. Whereas this one is very much build as you go. You just write down all the stuff under the Monday header, then after the Monday you just rule off and say Tuesday. You don't have to write in the additional scaffolded headers. If you're the kind of person who typically has a lot to write on your daily logs, then this next style may be more your speed. This one works on the idea of splitting the page in half again, but both sides of this are just used for tasks. So tasks running down one side and then tasks running down the middle, effectively doubling the amount of space that you have to write those tasks in. This daily log style though is more reflective, so a place to list out any wins from the day, so things that you were feeling accomplished about, any challenges that you had in the day, so things that maybe hindered your progress on whatever it was you were working on, and then a couple of spaces to write down some notes of things you might want to try in future to either lean into those wins, make them happen again, or avoid or mitigate those challenges. Then, because it's a daily log and I love to list out tasks, we have a good task list section down the bottom. As we talked about, which layouts are going to work for you in your mini journal very much depend on what you're using your mini journal for. So you could end up using your mini journal as a Commonplacing space, and so here we have one idea of how you could set that up. This is based on the idea of having a column that runs down the side here to indicate what type of media you're taking these notes from. And then to the right of this, you just write out the header of the piece of media and the notes that you're jotting down because you want to save them for later. While I've done this based on media type, what you could do is link it to some common problem areas that you're facing. Maybe one of your goals or something like that. Rather than using symbols, you could just use numbers. So that way when you flip through your Commonplace notebook, anything that has a 1 in front of it is related to life problem 1 or some kind of thing that you're trying to find better solutions for. This means that you'll end up organizing the information in a way that makes it easier to use for those problems. But for this example here, I just put in the little icons because I thought they were cute. One of the ways that you can use your little mini notebook is as a diary space, so writing in long form journal entries if you want to. That's kind of the thing that I use my mini notebook for, along with just making sticker pages, because my mini notebook is a self-care journal. Another way you can use your mini journal is as a 5-year journal, and how you'd set up your pages in that very much depends on how many pages your notebook actually has. But if, for instance, you have one that has 192 pages, then one of the layouts you could use would be by splitting the page in half horizontally and then having 2 lines per year for each of the days of the year. So like this one says, it's for January 1st. So on the 1st of January 2024, we have 2 lines to write on. Then a year later, on January 1st, 2025, we have another 2 lines to write on. This way, each year that we come back and write the next year's set of notes, you can kind of look back and see what was happening at this time last year or the year before. So on and so forth. Another way that you can use your mini notebook is as a kind of media review space. So whether that be book reviews, movie reviews, album or podcasts, really whatever else. I've set this one up based on book reviews. So you have a little space to put in some cover art for the book. You can give it a star rating, rate it in whichever form you like. I personally use the core pile system. Also specify when you finished it and take down some notes. In this style, you wouldn't probably write review in, you'd write the title for the piece of media, but it could be a really cute way to capture your thoughts about the different things you're watching or reading or listening to. Following the idea that I use my mini journal as a self-care space, one of the self-care related pages you could include is an all about me page. I've split this one up into 4 sections, so I am, I love, I have, I can, and then in the middle you could include a picture of yourself, or a drawing if you wanted to, but it's just a nice little summary or a snapshot of you at that given moment of time. Now you may have noticed that a lot of these pages don't really seem to be in any particular order, and as we get into the back end of these ideas, it is very hodgepodge, because I was really just putting them into the notebook as I thought of them. So the next idea we have is that of habit tracking, and using mini calendars in your notebook to signify what habits have or haven't been done. In this case, I just use a dot marker or a colored pen to say which ones have been done, so maybe they can be in grey, and then which ones haven't been done, and they can be in black. Just like we had in the year at a glance example, this very comfortably fits 6 mini calendars, so you could have 6 habits per page. I told you this was fairly unorganized, so the next ideas we have are actually monthly logs again. This first one has a calendar layout for the month, and then you just indicate what's happening on what days by circling the day and writing it underneath the calendar in the same color that you used. This is a way that you can effectively color code your calendar to see the types of events you have going on. I've kept it simple and just used gray for all of them, but you could again have blue for work, purple for social, whatever else. This way you don't have to take up a line per day when you may not necessarily have things going on every day, and you just end up with a list of the things that are actually happening and the days that things are actually happening on. Another simplified monthly log is the style we have here. So we have half of a line for each of the days of the month, 1 through 15, 16 to 30, and then a little to-do space down the bottom. You don't actually have to include this as a monthly log though. Some other ideas that I've listed are maybe having a word of the day. That could be a word related to the day, or maybe you're trying to learn a new word every day. You could write in a highlight what your focus was. Of course, you can include events like a typical monthly log, gratitude, moods, etc. Going again for a line a day option, this line a day layout also features a mini calendar so that you can indicate any special things that happened throughout the month. So we do have a line per day for 1 through 10 and then 11 through 30 and a little space for a month in review, but then you can use little symbols on the calendar to indicate important happenings. So events, memories, and other important stuff. You could use your mini notebook as a project journal, so a space to list out all of the different things you're working on and check them off when they're complete. This one's kind of set up like a homework log, so a space to say when it was set, what it actually is, when it's due, and tick off that you've submitted that piece. I think that an A6 notebook would be really handy for school because it is so small and compact, it makes it very transportable. But following on with the idea that this is completely out of order, here we have another daily log. This one has a sectioned off space at the top to specify what day it is, and then has a little space for something else. So it could be events for the day, any habits that you're trying to build and you want to kind of section them off and check them off individually, a memory space, whatever else you want to use it for. And then underneath this is a place to put in all of those to-dos. These are just examples to kind of show how the space would work though. Depending again on what you're using your mini journal for, it may be useful to have some kind of a monthly plan for things that you're doing. Let's just take house projects as an example. So maybe you can split up the different stages of your house project into the different weeks of the month, and then specify which week you're going to be working on which tasks. The mini calendar up here could be used to track something that you're trying to do daily, and then there's a space at the bottom here to specify tasks for this month and tasks for next month. This style of page actually has a lot of applications and I'm kind of curious to use it in my own journal. But flipping over, you can of course set up a sleep tracker. This one is a similar style to what we had for the timetable from before, except focusing on the hours that you will be in bed, asleep. On this one, the line represents the time in bed, so got in bed, got out of bed. The X represents when you fell asleep, which you can track if you have something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or whatever. And then maybe the grey dot represents times that you woke up. This can be especially helpful for any of us who wake up multiple times during the night and keeping track of what days that actually happens so that we can see if there's anything in particular that triggers us waking up in the middle of the night. And you can also see the days that you woke up and stayed in bed for a decent chunk of time after having woken up. Kind of just being able to use this information as a way to make better sleep habits. Another way that we can use our mini journal is as a mini recipe book. The structure of this one is that we have a space to put in a picture of the food, a space to write down the ingredients and the steps, any notes that you have for the recipe, and then some additional information like where you got the recipe from, its cook and prep time, how many serves it makes, and your rating of that meal. Hopefully if you've gone to the effort to put it in your mini notebook, it has a pretty high rating. Another way that you can use a mini journal like this is as a swatch book. You're probably not going to swatch exactly the same pen every single time, but in trying to keep this within the theme that we've kind of got going with these pages, I just used a grey Tombow. I know a lot of people set up very decorative looking swatch pages, but I personally prefer just to use little boxes of colour for each of the pens. In this one we just have a little scribble of each of the pen colours, and then you can specify maybe what brand the pen is from, what color number it is, or color name, really whatever information you want to include. One of the things that I really like to do for my goals is backwards plan them, so going from the ending ideal outcome and thinking what needs to come directly before this, and directly before that, and so on and so forth. So setting up something like a project timeline can be really useful for this. I've set this one up based on a month-by-month timeline, so what has to happen on the first month, second, third, fourth, fifth, and a space to write down what tasks need to be done in each of those periods of time. This just gives you a sequence of steps to follow to actually accomplish the project. You can also apply this structure to anything that's timeline based though. It doesn't have to be one specific project. Maybe this could be something like a gardening schedule and things that you're doing in the garden on the first month, second month, third. Maybe in the fourth month in particular, that's where you do some kind of big seasonal changeover, and there are a lot more steps for that one. So when are we harvesting things? When are we planting new things? Soil treatments, whatever else. Vogel is much more of a gardener than I am. A weekly log style that I sadly neglected before was the horizontal style, so I wanted to include it. This one just involves taking each of the pages, separating it into 4 bigger rows, and then labeling each of those rows for a day of the week, and a space for notes. This is good if you need a little bit more horizontal writing space compared to some of our previous examples, but don't necessarily need a long list of anything on each day of the week. My personal preference is vertical styles, but this one is pretty popular. I wanted to include another graph in our layout ideas, so we have a little ratings page here. This one is based on the idea of the Wheel of Life or Level 10 Life, so taking each of your different life categories and rating them out of 10. I've also indicated on here that you can show how they change over time, so maybe the little dot represents where the rating was last time you did the rating, and then the arrow indicates how it's changed over time. So for instance, in this example, physical health last time was at a 5, and now is being rated at a 4. Mental health was last time at a 5 and is now being rated at a 3, so on and so forth. I usually like to compare such a rating page with either maybe some notes or some goals that I'm setting for each of the life areas, just so I can improve my score come next time. But our next idea here is using your mini journal as a memories book. These boxes are just stand-ins for what could be maybe some little photos or something, and then you can have space beside them to do some journaling about whatever the photo is related to. Doing this style of memory keeping in something small like this A6 or pocket-sized notebook, I find just makes it a lot more approachable. You don't have to write quite as much, there's not as much space to do that, so it makes the process just a little bit less daunting. In planning a new journal, it is good to make a plan, and you can do planning in a mini notebook like this. I've set it up so that we have an ideas and notes space at the top, a place to write out any pages that you want to make, and a space to draw out some mini thumbnails of what those pages might actually look like. These 2 boxes at the bottom were just some leftover space, but you might want to use them to include some kind of a color code, or maybe a color swatch for the theme that you're going with the new journal setup, whether that be 2 focus colors or splitting this up a little more and introducing some more colors. I like the idea of an even 50 in terms of our page ideas. So our next one is a list of ideas for your notebook in general. So ways that you can use a mini notebook. We're not going to read through all of these, but do feel free to pause the video and have a snoop. And while this is not a definitive list of ways that you can use a mini notebook, I would love to hear in the comments about how you're planning on using your one. Or if you don't have one yet, what would you use a mini notebook like this for? If you're still stumped for ideas though, we do have a separate video with over 100 different ways that you could use a blank notebook. That one is worth checking out, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.